And what is up? Welcome in. Wes Mitchell here, Chris Clark, a jam-packed edition of GC Live Monday episode on the way. Chris, lots to get to, man. A big, massive recruiting weekend. I upgraded. I used to, every weekend like that was called a big recruiting weekend. I upgraded it to massive recruiting weekend this past weekend. And Gamecocks getting some public commits, maybe a guy or two who are not public yet either. And just overall, sort of that final push towards National Signing Day. It still feels a little bit weird. The signing day, the early signing period, doesn't quite feel like the old school February signing periods, but certainly a lot going on and a lot to track, and several final targets out there for South Carolina to, potentially land or, I was going to say or miss out on, but it does sort of feel like they've positioned themselves in a really good spot. And again, several of those guys, 4 to be exact, already going public over the weekend. So, Chris, before we dive into the individuals and before I tell everybody about Clint Hammond, let's start big picture. Obviously, a pretty productive weekend for the Gamecocks, and I don't think they're anywhere close to done yet as far as guys who are on campus who have some decisions to make.
Yeah, big picture look, we knew that high school recruiting, there are some targets left on the board for sure, and some of those, Wes, are going to carry into the month of February. But we had eyes on those situations. A couple of guys, from the high school ranks, or a few guys from the high school ranks that were in town this weekend, but also because of the transfer portal, right? Gamecock fans have been ready for the transfer portal giveth portion of the show instead of the transfer portal taketh. They've seen that episode and they're ready to move on to season 2, and that we saw some of that right over the weekend, not only in the form of some public commitments, but South Carolina also with some priority transfer targets on campus that have not, as of yet, announced decisions. But for some of those guys, Wes, they were able to get themselves into a favorable position. So I think overall, big picture, before we dive into some of the individual players, it was a successful weekend because they were able to nab some public commitments, some silent commitments, and they were able to get some at positions of need, help themselves out with some guys, whether you look at tight end, running back, wide receiver, linebacker, even they had a top high school target on campus at the linebacker position. Several 2024 guys who took in practice on Saturday who will be, potentially part of the future in Columbia. So overall, a successful weekend in terms of position of need and some of the names that they were able to have on campus this weekend.
Definitely, man. And I want to dive into all of those moving forward. And we'll, of course, run down the names to know moving into the signing period, even if they weren't on campus this weekend. A bunch of those guys were, but several guys who were not that we will also be talking about. But before we move any further, got to tell you about our main presenting sponsor here of the show, Clint Hammond. You have heard of him for the better part of 2 years now, and there have been some changes. So I am still working. I got to get our new graphics for the banner that goes over our head. But Clint Hammond and really all of the Mortgage Network crew is now with Movement Mortgage. So if you've worked with Clint in the past or you want to work with Clint in the future, nothing really changes on your end. It is still ClintHammond.com. That is still how you can find the information about if, sort of you're in the market for a new home, or if you just want to sort of see what is out there, what interest rates are, what a monthly payment might look like for you. Still all the same, but with a different name, different logo. Clint, the branch manager of the Movement Mortgage here in the Columbia area. You can still give them a call, 803-422-6797 or 803-771-6933. His new email address, however, is clint.hammond@movement.com. So, again, I will be telling each and every one of you about Clint every single show, and I'll have some more details on that move and some fresh logos and some new colors, it appears, as well. But certainly, regardless of the logo and the colors, we appreciate Clint always being a great supporter of this show and, of course, of Gamecock Athletics as well. Chris, who do you want to start with? I think we got to go with commitments, and then we'll talk about targets. And, I think actually before I even dive into those, because I have a habit. If we get deep down this rabbit hole, I'm going to forget a few headlines that I feel like are worth mentioning before we get sort of into what we're here to talk about. But the first one being, how about our guy Addison Williams sort of climbing that coaching ladder? A guy that from the very moment his career at South Carolina ended, sort of went the route of student coach and then has just worked his way up, was the cornerbacks coach at UCF, now being rewarded for his hard work and his good work, the new defensive coordinator for Gus Malzahn at UCF. Very well deserved, man. And you have seen some Gamecocks. They're starting to get to that age. The guys we were sort of around when we were in school, give or take, have reached that point where they've gotten enough of experience under their belt. He's a defensive coordinator. Chris Hampton, he's the DC at Tulane and actually was mentioned at the Arkansas job, which actually Travis Williams ends up getting. Addison ends up taking his spot at UCF, but a well-deserved promotion, and awesome to see a guy here from Carolina get to that point.
Yeah, sharp young coach has done a really good job and climbed that ladder quickly. There are several former Gamecocks, Wes, that are, doing a really nice job in the coaching industry. We've talked in the past about Travian Robertson. Chris Hampton got some mentions the other day, actually for that Arkansas job that ended up going to Travis Williams. Chris Hampton, who's now the defensive coordinator at Tulane, the guy I remember watching play in the I think late Lou Holtz, early Steve Spurrier era, and he was in the mix for that job. And so I think probably odds are he gets another bump up. Tulane obviously had a very good year this past season, but he may get another opportunity to move up soon. So yeah, really good to see for Addison. Not surprised at all that he's getting this opportunity. He's kind of been one of the fast risers in terms of young coaches in the industry lately.
Definitely. And Cedric Williams, North Carolina Central University offensive line coach, winning a national title this week, beating Deion Sanders' crew. So lots of good things in the coaching community for some former Gamecocks. So shout out to all of them. Also expected, but wanted to confirm this for everybody, Juice Wells telling us at Gamecock Central in a Garnet Trust interview that he will definitely be playing in the bowl game. That was expected. We had reported that was expected, but he confirmed it. Definitely going to play in the bowl game back in Columbia, going through, workouts and stuff like that. And we'll be there in 2 weeks. However, still debating on that final decision for after the bowl game. Does he jump to the NFL or does he decide to stick it out for what would probably be one more year, even though he does have multiple years of eligibility? So go check that out. There is a Garnet Trust interview on Gamecock Central YouTube and on GamecockCentral.com. Went into a number of topics with Juice. Always a really compelling interview and just a genuine guy to hear from. Very open, very honest. So enjoyed talking to him. All right, let's talk recruiting. 4 commitments. And Chris, I guess let's just go in order. Interestingly enough, the first public commit of the weekend was also, per my understanding, the first welcome home of the week as well, which came on Thursday, and that was Nick Elksness, who, again, I've told everybody, it's going to take me a moment to figure out how to get the L, the K, and the S's and the N's all in the right order. It's not a name that I have ever heard, to be honest. So
Yeah.
I'm just gonna you admit your flaws, right? That one's gonna be a struggle for me. So sorry, Nick, but the Gamecocks land a couple of Nicks this weekend, but the first being Nick Elksness from Florida, who had played a couple of years there, primarily on special teams. And I think you're sort of seeing South Carolina start to check the boxes of what they need to replace from a skill set standpoint in their tight end room.
Well, and this position was so critical. We knew there'd be some defections right after this season, but probably didn't anticipate this level of defections. I mean, a pretty much almost complete clear out of that room, at least from a scholarship standpoint after 2022, Wes. And, some key guys with different types of skill sets. I mean, look at every single tight end that played significant snaps last season, and each and every one of them are different. They have some different skills. It's Jaheim Bell with all the different things he could do, Stogner, Nate Adkins, Trey Kenyon. And so not only did they need more tight ends for this offense, but you also consider the fact that tight ends were a critical part of what Pete Limbo has done on special teams. Nate Adkins, we all saw his play in the Clemson game and how good he was. Trey Kenyon, Stogner, these guys played on special teams because those are the types of bodies and skill sets, physicality, size, ability to run that you're going to need to succeed. So Elksnis has not played a ton overall at Florida in his 2 years, primarily special teams. He's had a couple of different injuries that have held him back. But what he is, Wes, is a guy that I think you can plug in at being 6'6", 250 pounds now. He's physically impressive. He told us over the weekend, yesterday actually, that he's already taught with Pete Limbo about special teams and the ability the potential to jump in there early. He can go catch some passes for you, but I think a guy who's going to have a heavy special teams role and can fit as that inline type blocker for this offense.
Yeah, that's right where I was going to take you next. Let's make this, I guess, with all these tight end guys. It is what it is. You sort of have to look at who exits from the tight end position and who enters. And, I think they're in a good position with several of these guys they're after at that position. But as far as South Carolina's exits and now the addition of Nick, who do you think he most compares to, in your opinion, or at the very least, because I don't think there's a direct one-to-one here, but how do you see him being used in terms of compared to maybe one or two of the other guys? I would maybe say he's a combination of the couple of the other guys, maybe.
Yeah, I kind of think more along the lines of a Stogner, and just from like a size standpoint and how you can use him. We saw kind of the breakdown. Stogner ended up playing, I don't have it in front of me, Wes, but I'm pretty sure played the most snaps at the tight end position this season because of his size and his ability to go and block guys, in line on the perimeter. That's how they used him. Now, we'll see, Dow Loggins may tweak tight end usage and personnel packages and things like that. But I think from a size standpoint, he compares most favorably there. Stogner didn't have a great year catching the football for South Carolina. At Oklahoma, he showed some of that ability. I think it might be a little bit more of a question mark with Elksnis just because we haven't seen it yet at the college level. And he's not going to be, a Jaheim Bell or Hayden Hurst, or Jared Cook in terms of his athletic ability. But I do think from the standpoint of him being able to, put his hand in the dirt, be an inline blocker, be more that kind of prototypical tight end, that probably fits him the most.
Yeah, so I would say maybe body type Stog, maybe a little Nate Adkins and how you could maybe use him. Now, I don't know if you're going to see him. We saw Nate used more in the backfield, and we saw Nate's, I guess the game plan for Nate is probably the best way to say it, expand as the year progressed this past year. And really, he had a huge role as the year progressed. And then it went from a huge role more as a blocker, even was kind of a personal protector in pass downs, and then obviously got involved in the actual other side of the passing game late. So if he can be what Nate has been for them down the stretch, then, that may actually not even be fair to ask that of him. But I think, if you look at these guys, if they can add, I think a lot of Gamecock fans are paying close attention to, like a Trey Knox, who I think is much more of your flex kind of. Obviously, he's a receiver turned tight end. That's what he looks like to me, a guy you want to put in the slot. You still want to hope you can get him matched up with linebackers and safeties. You want to do just enough with him to where he is respected as a blocker, but I don't think you want him necessarily, in there having to play in the box a whole lot. Arkansas probably did a little bit too much of that with him. But if Carolina continues with the approach we have seen, obviously new OC, Chris, but we've seen under Shane Beamer, it seems like they still want to be a fairly pro-style offense. They've operated with two tight ends on the field quite a bit, And a lot of times, I think that means maybe getting some guys out there that have different skill sets. And one's more of a blocker. In this case, that would be Elksness. And then if you can add a Trey Knox to this mix, then, maybe he's that guy more the pass catching threat.
Yeah, Knox, I mean, big kid now, 6'5" and 240, 245 pounds, but has that receiver background. So the hands, the route running ability, he's a natural there. And so that, you think of those two paired and kind of how you can use them, how you can have them on the field at the same time, gives you some flexibility, some positional versatility. So I think it would be a very interesting mix. And then Wes, you factor in, some of the other guys, whether it's high school ranks. There's another transfer out there, that visited this weekend in Josh Simon from Western Kentucky, who is another physically impressive kid, a South Carolina native, played from Dalzell, played his high school football at Crestwood, and, really has established himself at Western Kentucky as a guy that is a pass catching threat. That's a little bit more of his forte. Had an injury in 2021. 2022, his volume's been down some, but he still caught multiple touchdowns. In his first 2 years at the school, West, he had caught 30 balls, both seasons. And he's Western Kentucky's all-time touchdown receptions leader for a tight end. So, another guy that South Carolina has an opportunity to add to the mix, and Simon probably more in like that pass catching category. Like if you're going with the Madden or the NCAA 2014 kind of rankings, but certainly a big kid who can do some different things for you.
Yeah. And I think with his body type, body size, just kind of the thickness, he's kind of a physically developed kid. I think Simon maybe has the best chance to kind of turn into that dual threat tight end, just the guy that can do a little bit of everything for you. Some of these, maybe if Elksness is the more inline guy, a Trey Knox. And again, Trey Knox is not committed. I'm kind of talking about him like he's already in the class. He is not. I think he's leaning to South Carolina. I think there's confidence on the Gamecock end that he could end up there. But to be official here, he is not committed. But he's more your true pass catcher. And then I think Simon can just do a lot of different things for you. I was looking at his PFF grades, Chris. Very highly graded this year, even though, his production has dropped off, as you said, a little bit over the last couple of years. Very highly graded. Has a chance to be, if they can get him in the mix, I kind of have a gut feeling on him. Like he's going to be one of those sneaky good pickups that maybe doesn't really get a lot of fanfare, but ends up playing a major role for South Carolina next year. And, I think the portal is interesting. Now that we have a little bit of data about kind of how this is playing out, I think you can do just as well, if not better, in the portal when you get creative about finding guys who have been productive at a little bit lower level than where you're at if you're South Carolina. Because in my opinion, the floor, and for those who don't really follow recruiting incredibly close, the floor, it's basically like, this is my least, like if I had a best case scenario and a worst case scenario, the floor is like my worst case scenario for this prospect. And so that's like everything doesn't go perfect, but I'm still getting this. So if you have a high upside guy, but it's very raw, the upside may be second round pick, but the floor maybe never, ever plays a down. So I look at these guys, your Nate Atkins, your Juice Wells, who I think Juice, you would say, has hit like the complete upside of what you thought he was going to be when you recruited him. But look at Nate Atkins. At the very least, he was going to be a solid special teams performer and a gritty blocker on offense and a smart kid that sort of just does whatever the team needs. So I look at some of these guys, a Joshua Simon, he's been at Western Kentucky. It's an opportunity for him to come back home potentially, play for his home state. South Carolina recruited him a little bit out of high school with Muschamp, never offered. I'm sure maybe a dream for him to potentially suit up for South Carolina. So if that happens, I again, I'm talking more big picture, but it also applies to him. I think you can find good players that aren't your like former 4-star guy that was at Alabama and transferred out type situation.
Yeah, and again, we said it earlier, different skill sets, but also I think some people have looked at it and said, geez, I know South Carolina had the mass exodus from the tight end room after this year, but this seems almost a little excessive, right? With the tight ends, when you count them up, what was the number, Wes? I think it was like 7, of guys that they legitimately have a shot with, between 2 high school guys that are already committed, Cam Sandlin, Connor Cox from the 2023 class high school ranks, then 3 transfer tight ends that you have a shot with. Nicholas Harbor, 5-star, who would be a 2-way player, right? So you've got him out there. And then a couple other high school guys that we'll get into from the 2023 class. So you're going, my gosh, that seems like a lot. But you keep in mind not only different skill sets, but different years of eligibility, right? So this isn't like you're taking, let's say South Carolina gets all or close to all of these guys. Yes, you're bringing them all in the same room, but A, your room's about empty anyways. And B, you're getting different levels in terms of experience and eligibility. So Trey Knox, I think, has a redshirt year, West, but whenever he steps on the field next, that's his final season. He's got 1 year of on-field play remaining. Elksness, the 2022 season, this most recent season, was a redshirt freshman, so he'll have 3 more years of eligibility. And then Simon is 2 to play 2, so he actually has 2 years left. So right there, if South Carolina can land all those guys, you have kind of different tiers, right? You would have Knox for a year, you'd have Simon for 2, you'd have Elksness for 3, and then you start stacking your high school guys and developing them. So I think it's a good strategy because you look at the different body types and skill sets they're bringing in. It can kind of, in some ways, replace those different body types and skill sets that you had from the guys that just finished up playing for you. And yeah, I mean, not every big name, not every guy out of the portal is going to be a big name who is a former super highly recruited guy. You may be finding, like you said, Wes, best example I can think of at South Carolina recently, a Juice Wells, a guy who was productive at his previous stop and can end up being even a star at this level too. Or you could find the other great example that you had, a Nate Atkins type lunch pail guy who's going to come in and add depth and do a lot of really good things for your football team.
Yeah, so South Carolina, I believe fully will continue to hit the portal. This is not it by any means. They're going to keep hitting it and keep trying to, I guess, tweak this roster, you would say. There's some spots where you say, all right, they need a guy to come in and play desperately. There are other spots where you're just trying to build out your roster and create depth, and it is more of an NFL approach, I think, than it ever has been, in the sense of you can go get a guy who's played some ball and has some experience and is a little bit older, as opposed to being in a position where you might feel like a freshman has to come in and play. Now, I do think they're in a position to sign a nice high school class at tight end as well. You look at the guys that are committed: Connor Cox, Cameron Sandlin. Sandlin, a guy I've had a sneaky good feeling about for a while anyway. I will buy stock in former quarterbacks who are transitioning to other positions, especially if they want to go to another position, and especially if they're tough-nosed. So DQ Smith, for example, different position, but tough-nosed kid was willing to make the move. Cam Sandlin, one of the toughest guys you'll find, and fully willing to make a move. So I really like these guys, but then you look at the potential. Could a Reed McKeska get added into the mix? He was on an official visit over the weekend, and he's a guy I feel like, Chris, we've been hearing has been flirting with South Carolina and flirting with the potential of ending up at South Carolina for months now. They finally get him in for the official visit. Some good timing there. Currently committed to Miami, but I think this is one of those things for me. Whenever a guy's committed to another school, from a Carolina perspective, you never count it until it happens. But it does feel like they have had some momentum with Reed McKeska.
Very interesting recruitment for Reed McKeska. He's a guy that is from Texas, one-time Clemson commitment, backed off that pledge, looked like he may be ticketed for Oklahoma, but instead committed to Miami, continued talking with Florida, continued talking with South Carolina. And so he's been on campus multiple times. He was in town west for the Tennessee game on an unofficial, followed that up with an official visit to Columbia this past weekend. And he's kept things kind of quiet, in terms of publicly, hasn't been, sharing a ton on social media about South Carolina. He's kept that kind of Miami centric. But when you follow the visits, he's been to South Carolina once in November, once in December, official visit. The returns seem really good from that. And he is a guy that has, two-way ability, meaning not both sides of the ball, but blocking and receiving. And I'm with you, Wes. You don't count it until it happens with a committed guy, but certainly there have been some positive signs for South Carolina there. So that's another high school guy. I mentioned Nicholas Harbor earlier, who South Carolina is going to continue to chase. That recruitment will go into the month of February. Most likely, quite likely, it seems that's what will happen with Harbor. And then another very intriguing one, who was also on campus this weekend. I think this would be number 8 overall in terms of pursued or committed tight ends. Shamar Easter, who's an Arkansas commitment. That one was very interesting.
Yeah, this one came, I would say, fairly pretty much out of nowhere. We put him on our list on Friday. We got wind he was going to be in. I mean, this is your Dow Loggins effect here, a guy who's obviously Shamar Easter is obviously committed to Arkansas right now. But Chris told us coming out, he's 50-50. South Carolina and Arkansas doesn't really sound like someone who is looking at other schools just to look. It doesn't sound like someone who really even wants to completely open things up and go through the recruiting process again or anything like that. I think if just my read from one time talking to the kid, I think if Dow Loggins is still at Arkansas, probably never even looks around. But that move sort of opened this up. He said 50-50 between Arkansas and South Carolina. He will visit Arkansas on January 15th. Not going to sign this week. Will make his decision, his final decision, you should say, and then sign in February. But, I mean, Chris, this is the number 1 prospect in the state of Arkansas. So there's nothing I've noticed. There's few things. I shouldn't say nothing. There's few things in recruiting that get a fan base more pumped up than if a new coach comes in and some random 4 or 5 star all of a sudden just visits a school. I feel like there's that newness to following a prospect. It's not a guy where maybe they've been a little bit fatigued by, oh, we're going to get this guy. Oh, no, we're not going to get this guy. Oh, he's wavering. He's going to that school. He's going to this school. When a new name pops up, fans get pumped. And when you look and start thinking about a possibility, if you're a Gamecock fan, wow, could still the top prospect in Arkansas, that's something braggable. You get the number 1 player from their state, speaks to him as a prospect, speaks to the relationship with Dow Loggins. And this kid has been committed to them since, I think it's August 2021. And was Loggins not a pretty big part of that in the first place, reportedly?
Yeah, huge. I know that Easter's high school coach, Matt Richardson at Ashland, was quoted in a Rivals story that Sam Spiegelman, who's now with On3, did, and just said that Dow Loggins was a huge part of why he ended up committing to Arkansas. And I'm sure it helped, that he was an in-state kid and all those things, but that Loggins was a huge, huge reason. So there's a really good relationship there. And Wes, I think what you said hits it exactly, that, South Carolina is not going to be recruiting a bunch of kids from the state of Arkansas. It doesn't make sense for a lot of reasons. They are barely even going to spot recruit the state of Arkansas. You might see, maybe a prospect or 2 every year if it's like a national level guy or there's some weird connection from, a high school coach and a current South Carolina coach. Other than that, you're just not going to see it, right? And so I think the fact that Dow Loggins is hired and almost instantaneously Shamar Easter from Arkansas is scheduling a visit to Loggins' new school kind of shows you the extent of the relationship there. So it may be tough, Wes. I mean, I know one thing that we have talked about is the notion that at some point the amount of tight ends may catch up to South Carolina in terms of February, because the bulk of their guys are probably going to be December signees between commitments, transfers, etc. Reed McKeska planning on signing Wednesday with the school. So it could be that Easter, by the time February rolls around, and says, man, they're kind of getting stacked up there. Or, hey, maybe I want to stay at home in the state of Arkansas, maybe both. But definitely an interesting storyline to monitor, and a very interesting skill set on this kid as well.
And as y'all saw, if you're watching the video version, also a basketball player. I fully thought I was popping up the football highlights there, and we got basketball instead. But hey, basketball, when it comes to, I was about to say receivers, really about any position, receivers, tight ends. Shoot, if linemen play basketball, I think that's a great sign as well. So the skill set carry over there, not one-to-one, obviously, but there's a lot of carryover from being dexterous on a basketball court and then being able to do the same on a football field. So I think that's interesting. A guy we'll keep tracking. I mean, I feel like Chris, he's probably one. They probably said, well, this kid wants to visit. Yeah, we got these other tight ends we're involved with. Most of them haven't committed yet. They haven't signed yet. Of course you bring the guy in, right? He's just that good.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And, man, you can see on film, like, this guy's athleticism. I mean, between – I'm with you. The ability to play basketball for a guy, like, of his size, that movement, and then you watch him, playing both ways here. Really, really quick, good hands, really good size, almost a receiver-type skill set at the tight end position. We'll have to get bigger, sure, but a dangerous receiving threat. So I think I agree with you. Complete no-brainer to bring him in, especially with the connection to Loggins. And it's one where you just give it a run and see what ends up happening, right?
No doubt, man. So another high school kid that does commit to South Carolina, and Tyshawn Russell. We'll go to him next, and I'm going to try to get his film pulled up here too, Chris, because I think he's a guy South Carolina fans probably aren't quite as familiar with. It's felt like they've sort of been searching for who's going to be that additional high school wide receiver in this class. And so we got word that Russell was coming in as well this past week. He did make it in. He was telling us he had an unofficial visit to South Carolina previously. He ends up getting the flu, doesn't get to go to the game. I didn't even pick up on if he made it to town, but then got that sick and didn't make it to the game, or if he didn't make it to Columbia at all. So I'm not sure. Either way, Chris, this was his first real complete in-depth exposure to the program. And he obviously liked what he saw. He had told us he was signing with South Carolina on Wednesday. He was going to announce it. I'm guessing he just decided, I don't want to wait. Went ahead, commits to South Carolina on Sunday night. And again, helps fill that role in that I think they really wanted another high school receiver. This is a guy who's a playmaker, has played, from what I understand, quite a bit of DB in his career, and has transitioned to offense this past season and just sort of took off from there. Looks to me to maybe be more of a slot guy, but certainly we'll see how Dow Loggins approaches that and sort of the different receiver positions within his scheme, how he wants to use guys. I think that's probably still a little bit to be determined, I should say, but at least off the hoof, looks like a guy to me who's maybe more of a slot guy, but we'll certainly see.
Yeah, not a ton of experience at receiver, because this senior season, 2022 high school season, was the first year where he was really a full-time focused wide receiver. But he had a huge year, 61 catches, over 1,300 yards, and West 22 touchdowns. So I'm bad at math, but that's like a third of his catches went for touchdowns. And so that very first play, if you're watching the video stream here, there's a lot of those on this highlight reel. Bishop McDevitt won the state championship this year in their division in Pennsylvania, and he had 4 touchdowns in that game receiving as well. So Really, really big senior year for Tyshawn Russell. He went under recruited overall, Wes. I think one reason could be was that he was a little bit of a late bloomer from a wide receiver standpoint. Like you said, also a talented DB. Will need to get bigger, right? But I mean, this is still a guy that I think we may look back in a few years and say, that this has potential to be a steal, a later steal for South Carolina.
Certainly, man, and I'm always going to bet on playmakers, and yeah, he may be Travis weighing in saying he's a little bit raw as a receiver. I could agree with that, but I think someone that if he's already getting that open on just natural ability and just the smoothness in which he changes direction and operates, then I think Justin Stepp will be a excellent guy to help him sort of hone those route running abilities and those steps and that technique and all that stuff. So I think a solid sort of late pickup for South Carolina and somebody that I think they had sort of identified a couple months ago and really started to prioritize for that final or for that next high school receiver spot. And, probably someone that South Carolina fans aren't quite as familiar with yet, but hopefully they will get there. And again, hey, high school recruiting, Chris, it does still exist. Like, I think we get so talked into the portal stuff, and it is what everybody is talking about. But it does still matter, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
No, it does. There are varying opinions on the transfer portal, obviously, and I don't think there's any doubt. It's kind of hard to go against this notion, Wes, that high school recruiting has been affected for certain guys. Even guys like maybe a Tyshawn Russell, Wes, where there's a temptation, and sometimes it makes sense to go into the portal instead of quote unquote taking a chance, or even if you got a high school player you really like, there may be a temptation to, if you need more immediate help, take a guy from the portal. And so that has affected high school recruiting, but it's still going to be a large part of what you do. Getting high school guys in your program, developing them, and then ultimately trying to keep them, Wes. You don't want to end up being just a training ground where you're signing guys, developing them for a year or two, and wanting to keep them and then them leaving. So it's a different era. There's a lot to it. But definitely, I mean, look at South Carolina's current recruiting class. Yeah, there's some transfers in there. Yes, the transfer class is going to continue to be added to, but the bulk of the class is still from the high school ranks, and some certainly quality players on that front as well. So still very important.
Yeah, a whole new world out there. I like this. Beckham says the portal is just adding another ingredient to the dish, and it's adding something else onto the plate of college coaches and the recruiting departments out there. And one more thing you got to manage. But as with anything, if you can manage it more efficiently than your opponent, and that's in terms of just pure volume of guys that are out there and having a good feel for who's going to enter the portal, what they're looking for when they do, and of course that evaluation aspect, which is always going to be a big part of it. Where do you spend your energy? Where do you spend your time as a staff? All those things are going to determine, as with a lot of other things in recruiting, who is most successful hitting the transfer portal. So speaking of the portal, Gamecocks go into the portal to get a guy that I think, Chris, you and I had sort of we were anticipating this one happening, so probably not a surprise to South Carolina fans who have paid attention on Gamecock Central. But Mario Anderson Jr., running back out of Newberry, highly productive kid that I think was always an FBS guy. Had some, I guess, not quite as much attention out of high school. Maybe some academic stuff held him back, I guess, potentially. But ends up at South Carolina with a couple of years of eligibility left.
Yeah, this is someone that really was pretty dominant, on the Division II level. So is this a huge step up? Absolutely. Moving up from playing Wingate and shout out Jalen Brooks and Lenore Ryan, to playing, Tennessee and Florida and Clemson and Georgia. Yes, big step up. But you look at what this guy did on that level, Wes. He was a finalist for the Harlan Hill Trophy, which is the Heisman Trophy for the D2 level. 7.4 yards a carry, what did he have? 1,600 yards rushing, I think. Had an absolutely huge 2022 season. Probably not a guy, Wes, that's going to run away from SEC competition in terms of, making those huge explosive runs at this level. But a tough kid. Told me he got emotional when he got the offer from South Carolina. He's a Palmetto State kid. And so obviously there's going to be some opportunities for him and for other guys in that running back room next year.
Yeah, I kind of just feel like there's some Kevin Harris here, Chris. Like Kevin Harris ended up actually it's kind of weird. When Kevin was being recruited, I didn't really consider Kevin Harris to be a home run guy. Like I wasn't like, oh, speed is his best element. And then he gets to South Carolina and he just had a weird way of running past people. So I don't know if we necessarily should expect that here, but just kind of the low center of gravity or center, even just the running style, I should say. Kind of just looks like Kevin a little bit, and they're kind of that bowling ball mentality, I think, in there. Difficult to bring down, difficult to really hit square, it looks like. And as you said, there'll be a jump up, but he seems to have the body type. That's one thing I know South Carolina, Chris, you noticed they didn't offer him before they brought him in. They brought him in on the visit, then they offered, and for what I understand, they just wanted to kind of check those final boxes. Is he as big as he looks? Is he as big as he is listed at? I don't know what he measured in at South Carolina, but clearly he checked that box. So you see that play right there. Kevin Harris probably takes that to the yard, touchdown. But I think you sort of see that power. Somebody asking, is he a power back? I would say yes. I think this is a guy that you're going to hand the football to potentially 20-something times. You're going to hand it to him on short yardage. It may not be that flashy at all times, but is a guy who can grind it out, I think.
Yeah, and there's some value to that. I think South Carolina was looking for that in a back in this class. Not even necessarily a quote unquote bigger back, but a guy who could go and slam forward and get some positive yardage. And that's what it looks like they have here in Anderson. Really tough kid. Has a burst at the line of scrimmage, Wes, and certainly showed the ability to have some long runs at the Division II level. Those you figured would cut down some, right, just because of the step up. But I think he's going to bring some traits that could translate to South Carolina. He's got good enough size, the way that he runs, his ability to take blows, deliver punishment, I think could serve him quite well at South Carolina. And I don't think, regardless of the level, Wes, I think that type of production is eye-popping. You got to be a good player to put up that type of production anywhere. It doesn't mean it's going to, he's not going to average 7.4 yards a carry and have 1,600 yards at South Carolina, I don't think, right? But certainly that shows you that he has the potential to step up a level.
Yeah, and a finalist for the Harlan Hill Trophy, one of 9 finalists for that award, which is essentially the Heisman Trophy for Division II football. So one of the top 9 players, at least this season, according to that award, in all Division II football. So I think also you cannot look past the fact that he got so emotional when he got the offer, Chris. I mean, I think in this day and age, finding guys that really want to be in your program and want to be there, I think that matters as well. So we will certainly see. I think another low floor player for South Carolina. Like I think I get the questions about, you take a guy from D2. I think the upside will sort of be determined by how much can he make that transition to this level. But I think the floor is that he will be a really solid, maybe even just short yardage guy. I think you certainly hope he can be more than that. But I think that's kind of your worst case scenario. It's pretty solid when you consider they don't have a bunch of those guys on the roster right now who fit that mold that we're talking about. And so let's get into the 4th commitment of the weekend. Chris is our resident enunciator. So
And
we're gonna give you a
pronunciate.
shot at this. Yeah, have you talked to the second Nick commitment?
I have not. We have not caught up yet, but here's what I'm going to go with, and when I get a chance to chat with him, I will confirm. I'm going with Nick Gargiulo. I
That
don't.
sound. I mean,
Does that
that
sound right?
sounds pretty good, Chris.
I think it's pretty good. We'll be confident in it. We'll just say it's Gargiulo. It could be Gargiulo. It could be a bunch of different things, but I'm going Gargiulo. And this is another interesting one, Wes. This is kind of a need take. Um, it kind of reminds me of like the NFL draft when you're following your team and they're taking somebody and you may like not know who it is, but then all the analysts are like, this guy was a really good player at this level and he's going to fit an immediate need. I think that's kind of what you've got here with Nick G. Got Nick E and Nick G. At Yale, former left tackle, moved over to center and really took off. All Ivy League guy, team captain for Yale, and drew some offers out of the transfer portal from some other programs up north, Boston College, which has always seems to produce offensive linemen, Syracuse, some other schools, but was a really good player, good size, Wes, sharp kid. And as someone that we had heard, for quite a while behind the scenes that the staff was going to look at once he entered the portal as a graduate transfer. But you think about it, man, I mentioned the need. Eric Douglas has been a starter for a long time and played a lot of football at South Carolina. Really sharp guy. Does a really good job of getting the offense situated for the Gamecocks. This is his last run, his last ride in the Gator Bowl. And so this is someone you could bring in who may be a ready-made replacement for Eric Douglas.
And a very, very interesting connection in the ever-connected world of college athletics. His head coach at Yale, none other than Tony Reno, who is Dante Reno's father. So pretty cool connection there. And Chris, I think, you nailed it. E-Doug is gone. You'd kind of always need that guy at center that is a leader, that's a sharp guy. I think especially when you look at what I think South Carolina wants to be on offense. Yes, they're going to streamline this thing. Yes, they want for it to be a more efficient version of a pro-style offense. But if you're going to be pro-style, I don't think Carolina's ever going to be, unless they completely change their philosophy down the line, their current approach, they're not going to be one of these offenses that is just a high school spread that's completely overly simplified. So I think having someone who can help set your protections, that was a change they made late last year, was sort of putting more on Eric Douglas to help set the protections, taking it off of the quarterback. And I think this will prove to be an important get, even if he just ends up providing depth. I'm sure they hope he can come in and kind of take that center spot. Even if he's just a depth guy, then I think that's a positive, and you have to continue to add guys like that to your roster. So we will certainly be tracking the next couple of days leading into National Signing Day. Some guys still out there that have not gone public yet. And then, of course, South Carolina will try to close out with some uncommitted players as well. And, one of the ones that we're not tracking in terms of being an official visitor this weekend, but I think has gathered quite a bit of intrigue from South Carolina fans, Chris, would have to be Lenore Sellers, who I would dare say, probably not even an argument against this, he has seen his stock rise from his senior season more than anybody else in the state of South Carolina. I saw him on last Monday at practice. You saw him in the Shrine Bowl itself on Saturday. Were you as impressed as I was with just the way the ball just pops out of his hand?
Yeah, just has. I'd start even with his demeanor. He's just got just a very calm demeanor. Doesn't get too up or down. He's a great kid from multiple accounts we've heard. Academically, how he conducts himself. but you look at him, his demeanor stands out, the size stands out because he's 6'3", 215. He's built very well. And yeah, he can throw it. I mean, in Lenoris, you watch him play and you just walk away and go, I don't really see any holes in the game. You know, you don't say, well, he can do all these things, but he's too small. You don't say, well, he can't run or he can't make these throws. You don't say he's got all these tools, but the production's not there. You can try to argue with yourself, but it just constantly comes back to the fact that he's a really, really good player and I think a really, really good prospect, Wes. So crafty runner, right? Like he can break off some bigger runs at the high school level, but I think it's really just his craftiness and his toughness as a runner. He's really good at administering an offense, an accurate thrower of the football, can make all the throws. And then obviously he put up giant numbers this year running the South Florence offense and leading them to a state title game.
Yeah, and I think it was Chris Deering who has been covering high school ball for as long as anybody out there, who said that basically he's one of the best. I don't remember if he said one of or he said the best. Definitely one of the best quarterbacks he has ever seen since he's been covering ball in the Palmetto State. And so, yeah, if South Carolina can pull this off, they're certainly doing everything they can to try and flip him from Syracuse. I've felt like their chances have grown stronger pretty much every day since they started pushing. Like I feel like they've gradually put themselves in a better and better position, and feel pretty good about where they sit right now, but we shall find out. Friday, actually, so not a Wednesday signing, which, Chris, if it does end up being South Carolina, is actually very helpful for us in terms of coverage because we won't be running around doing 1,000 things on Friday like we probably will be on Wednesday. So that one's certainly one to keep an eye on. We got a few minutes left here in the show. Let's see, who have we not talked about? How about Tree Babalade, former Gamecock commit? They have not given up, it appears. Maryland is making their push as well.
Mm-hmm.
Tree teasing the folks on the Twitter today. I believe he said he's going to have something for everybody tomorrow, but he said if his Instagram followers get to 4,000, he may put it out today. Tree having some fun with this, obviously. Where do we think this thing is, man? I think we both probably shouldn't make a prediction because, I mean, I don't want to speak for you. I wouldn't really feel comfortable one way or the other throwing a prediction on this thing. But where's your head at?
Well, after he decommitted from South Carolina, then he's very shortly afterwards at a Maryland basketball game. It's a home state school. You look back, Wes, at the fact that it looked like Tree was going to commit to South Carolina. I think this was in July over the summer, pushed it back a little bit. Maryland made a huge push and made it really close at that time, but he went with the Gamecocks ultimately. Maybe we see a repeat of that, or we are seeing a repeat of Maryland making a big push, right? There seems to be some confidence on the Maryland side. I know Chad Simmons, who does a phenomenal job at On3 National, has heard some very positive Maryland things. But, Wes, like you said, it seems like South Carolina is not giving up. It seems like there's some indications that it's not a done deal for Maryland. And so maybe South Carolina has kept itself in striking distance for Tree. I'm with you. I'm not going to make a prediction, but it could be that although a lot of the signs and tea leaves have pointed towards Maryland, maybe South Carolina staff, Shane Beamer and company, can bring it back to the original reasons that he picked South Carolina, and that was he wanted to get away and play in the SEC and all these different factors. So the best way I can put it is we are still going to heavily track it up until whenever he decides to put out something on Instagram or Twitter. And Wes, even then, track it up until he signs on Wednesday or whenever he decides to sign.
We will track it until the plane arrives in Columbia.
That's right.
Or in Maryland. I guess it wouldn't be a plane there, but y'all know what I mean. Until it's over, we will be tracking it. And so Brandon with a good question here, a guy we have not mentioned, Elijah Davis, the former Wagner Sally standout. now at East Mississippi Community College. Huge target for South Carolina. They've been on him for a while. This is one of those where Jody Wright and Jimmy Lindsey have really sort of kind of tag teamed this recruitment. And I think, y'all, that South Carolina's in really good shape here. Elijah, not one that does a ton of interviews, doesn't say a whole lot, doesn't live in the limelight, but it's felt pretty good for South Carolina for some time. There's a little Tennessee buzz, I would say, Chris, after the OV there. I think it swung back to the Gamecocks, and I would feel pretty comfortable predicting South Carolina with Elijah Davis, and someone that I think they've made it clear with Zach Pickens moving on. They do have good depth at defensive tackle, but if he can be what they think he is, then Elijah is someone who can come in and make an immediate impact.
Yeah, definitely an impact type of guy. I remember seeing him at the high school level, Wes, when he's coming out of Wagner Sally, and thought not the same type of player as Javon Kinlaw, but looked at him and thought this guy could be a D tackle. He could be an offensive lineman. Certainly, he's gotten to the JUCO level and continued to develop, picked up some nice offers. Tennessee seemed to really give him something to think about, but I'm with you. The odds seem to favor the Gamecocks here, and he's going to have every opportunity, I think, to come in and earn some PT. Wes, I did just think of one other guy we need to talk about real quick before we get out of here. Another transfer running back, unless we talked about him and I just forgot already in the span of 57 minutes. Dominic Richardson from Oklahoma. Another tough – what's that? Oklahoma State, yeah. Well, he is from Oklahoma. He's an Oklahoma native.
Yeah,
played at Oklahoma State. He had a pretty good year this past season in terms of production as well. He's a physical, he's doesn't look as big as Mario Anderson, but actually runs pretty physical. And so that's another prospect that was on campus in Columbia for an official visit over the weekend. And, just kept things pretty quiet. But seems like from some of the returns that we got that South Carolina stands a solid shot there as well.
Yes, we'll keep an eye on that one. And let's see, man. Who else do we need to chat about real quick? And yeah, there are some 2024 guys that were on campus. Mazio Bennett being in town, Dante Reno, of course, being in town. Some big time 2024 guys, Blake Franks, but we'll go into all those guys later on because we're sort of focused on this signing day right now. But someone, Chris, we've not mentioned that I guess we probably do need to talk about real quick would be Cameron Robinson, the linebacker commit for Virginia currently. South Carolina trying to flip him. You look at Florida State, they're trying to flip him as well. And, someone that it feels like South Carolina has a little bit of momentum with. They went in home earlier this week. And going to be an interesting one to follow, I think, going into Wednesday.
Yeah, it certainly appears so, man. What do you think? What do you think on that one? Wes, did I lose you?
I think I got you back, Chris.
Yeah, I totally lost you there for a second. Restate your question for me, if you will. I
don't know who. Yeah, I don't know whose connection dropped off, but we definitely lost the connection there for a second. Where is your head at on Cameron Robinson?
Yeah, Cameron Robinson.
Yeah.
Okay, got you. Yeah, did not break up that time. Yeah, so that one's interesting. Here's what I thought going into the South Carolina visit. It seemed like, Virginia commitment from the state of Virginia, went to FSU the weekend before South Carolina, and it really, to me, sounded like FSU had made a giant push. Fast forward, after yesterday, once he wrapped up his official visit, I was still wondering about the status of FSU. I don't know this for sure, but it doesn't seem like maybe the FSU is quite as big of a factor right now. And so South Carolina seems to really have done well for itself. And so there was a lot of talk about SEC. The staff told Cameron Robinson, hey, you're an SEC linebacker. So It may come down to, Wes, what conference do you want to play in? And then do you want to stay close to home and stick with the Virginia commitment, or do you want to go do something different and play in the SEC? I think the visit went about as well as it could, but I think it just comes down to comfort level for him. I won't rule out FSU because I don't have enough specifics there. We've just heard that maybe they're not quite – I kind of thought FSU was the leader coming off last weekend, and that may not be the case at this point.
Yeah, and kind of interesting there, man. I thought that was a really not funny, but it was a really pointed recruiting pitch to tell the guy, hey, you're an SEC linebacker when you're going up against two ACC schools. So we will see if South Carolina is able to pull that off. He's going to make his announcement on Wednesday as well. He also told Gamecock Central that he knows where he is going. So he has it all figured out, just is waiting to announce on Wednesday. By the way, before we get out of here, I want to tell you about our friends at Liberty Tax, 803-462-5576. Shout out to Larry and his team here in the Columbia, Irmo, and Lexington area. Appreciate them being big supporters here of GC Live. Actually going on a year now. Liberty Tax has been sponsoring the show for nearly a year. We hope to have them back on for 2023 as well. And certainly as tax time approaches, maybe even if you want to sort of make some moves now that will affect your tax preparation for 2023 as you do your 2022 taxes, certainly you can give them a call for that as well. 803-462-5576. Chris, I think I'm all out, man. What about you?
Yep, I'm out, man. Let's go get some more stuff done to get ready for signing day on Wednesday. It is going to be a doozy.
As always, go check out the content, GamecockCentral.com. He is Chris. I am Wes. Thank you all for the support. Thank you to all of our sponsors for the support, and we'll see you all very soon.